the topic we're going to be talking about for the next hour is the idea of the museum as a collection of collections. And in particular, we're going to talk about the contributions, in all senses of the word, of different private collectors, both at the founding moments of those museums and as they've developed and perhaps changed along the way. To discuss this, I'm delighted to say that we've got representatives. Well, we've got people from three major international museums. I'm delighted to introduce Katie Luber, the president and director of the Minneapolis Institute of Art. We also have Per Hedström, the head of exhibitions at the National Museum Sweden. And we have Guillaume Kientz, the CEO and director of the Hispanic Society Museum and Library in New York, which is having a particularly exciting year coming up. Just a bit of housekeeping as well. Guillaume, unfortunately, has to leave us to catch a train at 4:30. So if we slant the conversation his way to begin with, that'll be why. And I'll try and leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So as Simone said, do get thinking. And to begin, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to show us a few images as a way of introducing their museum and the spirit in which it was founded, and things that have happened along the way to make it a collection of collections. So, Katie, I'm going to begin with you, and here is your first slide.
Well, thank you, Fatima. I'm so delighted to be here today with all of you, and especially with you. And this is a great topic, and for Minneapolis, which is a museum that opens its doors in 1915 in a McKim, Mead and White building that was a source of great civic pride. I wanted to just quickly show that we have had tremendous collectors in Minneapolis who wanted to make sure that the museum was truly encyclopedic and international in scope. And so I start with a wonderful picture of Mary Griggs Burke, who is one of our most important donors and collectors, more recent as well. And she was an incredible collector of Japanese art, and her collection ended up being divided between her hometown of Minneapolis, us, and New York City, where she lived for many years. And I, as a lowly graduate student many years ago, was fortunate enough to be invited to her apartment. So I wanted to start with a woman. But her collection is not only important for the sheer number and quality of works of art that came to Mia, but also because she left us a large endowment that allows us to continue to buy Japanese art. And that makes all the difference, may I just say. And then I'll just quickly go on. One of our other famous benefactors in the Twin Cities is Mr. Walker. Many of you all know the Walker Museum, the Walker Art Center, which is known now for contemporary art. But this Jade Mountain, which is the second largest single piece of jade in the world, was on Mr. Walker's dining room table in Minneapolis for a long time, and now it's in our museum, where it was a partial gift and partial purchase with money from the next person, Mr. John R. Vanderlip. We call him JRVD very fondly in Minneapolis, who was one of the earliest patrons of the museum and loved European art, and many works of art bear his donor's insignia, but more than 1,300 others were acquired with the funds, the interest from the endowment that he left. So he left us more than $1 million in 1915, which now is really the basis for why we have such a strong ability to continue to buy wonderful art here at Maastricht, for instance. And then going on, I have a picture of Alfred Pillsbury, of the Pillsbury Doughboy, yes, because Minneapolis was also on the Mississippi River, a great center for trade, for raw materials, for natural resources, and Pillsbury was one of the first to really be involved in the great milling industry there. He was also he was obsessed with China, so he bought 1,400 imperial robes. We have right now an exhibition of 170 of his archaic Chinese bronzes. It's called Eternal Offerings. I urge you to come and see it. It's fantastic. And here is one of those bronzes that he bought, one of the great ones. And it's followed by other people, like Bruce Dayton was one of our very, very most, I think he served as a board member for more than 50 years. Bruce Dayton was the founder of what we all know as Target today. And he was such an incredible collector and donor. And he was very interested in French Impressionism, as you can see the Manet here. But in about 1990, he bought one of Monet's haystacks, and he paid $5 million for it. And he said, that's it. No more French Impressionism. They're too expensive. I just would love to think of what he would think today. And he turned his attention to Chinese furniture. So then just building on the strength of what Pillsbury did. And then the last is a man named William Hood Dunwoody, who gave us incredible works of art, like our famous Germanicus by Poussin, which was the number 2 in the Barberini inventory of Urban VIII. And it's actually right now in Rome, about to be inaugurated in a wonderful exhibition about the great collecting of the Barberini in Rome. And in exchange, we will have in Minneapolis later in the summer the Judith and Holofernes by Caravaggio. So if you haven't ever been to Minneapolis, this summer is a really good time to come. So there, that was a race through time, and in no particular order, but...
I'm sure we'll come back to some of
yes.
those moments in time. Thank you, Katie. Per, the National Museum obviously has a different origin story. It's one of the oldest public museums in Europe, but I think you're going to talk about a moment a little bit further on in time, if we get to your first slide.
Yeah. Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Here, yeah. Actually, the museum was founded in 1792, which makes the museum one of the first, as you mentioned, in the world, actually, as a public museum. It was founded by the King Gustav III, or actually founded just after his death. But he was a very sort of influential person to what the museum actually became. But before him, there was this collector, Count Carl Gustav Tessin, who here is sitting in his library or study, around 1740 it is, or a little bit early maybe, portrait by the French portrait painter Aved. And this was painted during Tessin's short period as a Swedish ambassador in Paris for just 3 years. And during this very short period, he acquired so many artworks that you really can't really imagine the sort of the quantity and quality of what he actually purchased at that time. You can see some of the things in this picture. There is a small bronze sculpture by, I think you can see that, some figures on his left by Gian Bologna, and he's holding a print which shows Raphael's frescoes in Villa Farnesina, Renaissance print. And these objects, of course, tells us that collecting art was one of his sort of hobbies, if you will. He was too sort of ambitious, or what, I don't know how to describe it, but he had no sense for economy, and he just wasted all his money on this, and was actually forced to sell it a few years later. And the buyers were members of the royal family in Sweden. So that's how his super important collection, which contains piles of old master drawings, Renaissance drawings, Dutch drawings, and also a very good collection of his contemporaries, so to speak, French 18th century painters, and also some Dutch 17th century masters like Rembrandt and things like that. So this collection became part of the Royal Collection, and the Royal Collection became the National Museum in the late 18th century. So this man and his collection is very present in our museum today. And I suppose we can come back to what we've done when it comes to exhibitions and things like that. So that's that. And I have just one other picture, which I will, no, maybe in the next one. This is kind of a completely different story. This is maybe the most valuable, when it comes to money, picture in our collection. A picture that shows us the very sort of birth moment of Impressionism. Renoir's painting from La Grenouillère, 1869. This was given to us by somebody, we don't know who it was, in 1924. And that's a completely different thing. It's one of the most important pictures in the collection, which was just given to us. Please have it, do whatever you want with it. And I'm saying this because it's these two sort of, this is two completely different stories. One is a collector which wanted to be sort of known as a collector and who we still sort of praise as an important man and things like that. And this is just a picture, even though one of the most important ones there is. So I think I'll stop there.
Perhaps we will come back to what donors expect.
Yeah, exactly.
When they give their collections to museums a bit later. But Guillaume, can you talk about Archer Milton Huntington?
Sure, happy to. And good afternoon, everyone, and thrilled to be here. So this is the Hispanic Society Museum and Library. It is in Manhattan, New York, between Columbia and the Cloisters, uptown. And it was founded by Archer Milton Huntington in 1904. It opened to the public in 1908, and it really made a lot of noise in 1909 when they organized the first ever Sorolla exhibition in New York that attracted over 150,000 visitors in 1 month, forcing the museum to stay open until 11 p.m. So that was the big fuss that accompanied the opening of that museum. So you see our majestic campus that we are sharing with the American Academy that you can see here on the west side of the campus. And it's a very peculiar museum, and it's very different from the National Museum in Sweden or the Maya, because it's basically the doing of one man, Archer Milton Huntington, and perhaps you can move to the next slide. So yes, it's only one person, but a person with multiple personalities, because he really was a scholar, he was a poet, self-published, but not that bad poet, I mean, quite a good one. He was a collector, but he was also a museum founder and a museum director, because really until his death in 1955, he was the boss, and he had his office next to the lobby, so he could control whoever was coming in and all that. So because of his very peculiar approach to art or to objects, he created this amazing place. We have a collection of 750,000 items, photographs, jewels, Islamic art, paintings, sculptures, drawings. I mean, name it, we have it. And that was a surprise that for me when I arrived, when I took the job 2 years ago. I have no idea we had so much and in so many different directions. And that's really a result of his inextinguishable curiosity. And the next slide is a view of the main court. So this is that's before the renovation. We are reopening this space and some others in early April. And that shows a bit, you know, the interest he had. He really was, you know, different people at the same time. One was the passionate about the Spanish and Portuguese speaking world, and he wanted to document the different cultures of the different communities and countries. One was the collector of contemporary art, living artist, and he commissioned 243 works from Sorolla, for instance, 70 from Lopez Mesquita, and many others. And then he was also a collector of rare books and manuscripts, not that much a collector of fine art. I'm still debating with myself whether he was into fine art or not. The most famous painting we have is The Duchess of Alba by Goya, But I wondered whether he bought it because she was the Duchess of Alba, that's a prominent family in Spain, because it was by Goya, major artist, or because she is dressed with this black dress and mantilla, which was one of his interests too. Perhaps because he checked all those boxes, he bought it. And so yes, it's really a collection without border, without, it starts in ancient time. We have a few pre-Columbian pieces up to today, and that's what makes the interest of it.
Well, that certainly fits the collection of collections idea, but I'm curious that you describe him as, unlike the Mir and the National Museum Sweden, it's founded by one person, but he was very careful not to call this institution after himself, which he easily could have done because there are Huntingdons, his mother in particular, who did name museums and after themselves.
He had a complicated family story because he was conceived out of the wedlock, so he was not exactly accepted into society, although he was that rich that he wasn't refused either into society. So he was always a bit at the border, and I think that plays an important role in his interest for a school, for a kind of art or for cultures that were totally overlooked, if not despised at the time. We are a few years after the Spanish-American War, and there was an agenda in the US to kind of erase, the council would say today, the Hispanic roots of this country. And he thought that was important to preserve. And when he was a young boy, 9 years old, legend has it, he went to Texas to visit an uncle. He saw an architecture that didn't look like New England or New York. He asked around what it was, and people answered in Spanish, so he couldn't understand that. So he asked his uncle, well, that used to be Mexico, and before that used to be Spain, and before that, and so on and so on. So it's really triggered something, and again, the result is this amazing place that he built. But his mother, because it's the doing of one man, but this man was surrounded by many fascinating people. One is his wife, Anna Hyatt Huntington. She was an important sculptor. One is his mother, Arabella Duval Huntington. She was a very important collector, Rembrandt, Dutch paintings and 18th century French furniture mostly. And one was his cousin, Charles Pratt, who is the architect of most of the campus. So that's a family story.
But can we talk a little about, I want to talk to Katie and Per as well a little later about how collections change over time, how we regard them has changed, how they've seemed at different times. But can we talk about sort of Archer Milton Huntington perhaps being ahead of his time in some ways? Because he had an unusually ethical approach to being a collector and what he bought and where he bought it.
Right, it was kind of, I call him a preservationist because he wanted to preserve the heritage of those many cultures. And to him, preserving meant that he shouldn't buy from those countries. He wouldn't deprive those countries from their heritage. He did that once only for the rare books and manuscript library, but just because it was refused by the Spanish government. And nevertheless, he was not very happy about that, although we are, because it's an amazing library. So after that, he really decided not to buy from Spain, and he would only buy on the international market. So he was very much ahead of his time, yeah.
But also, Katie, you talk about this moment of civic pride. Was there a sense that did those collectors have particular things that they wanted to bring to Minneapolis already? Were they trying to compete with other collections?
I think both of those were true. I think that in Minneapolis, which Minnie, is the Dakota word for lakes, and we are the state of 4,000 lakes or something, or maybe 40,000, I can't remember. So many lakes there. But certainly the idea was to bring a polis, a cultured, civilized city to the middle of a place that was fairly wild. And so they wanted to bring what they saw as this, the height of European culture, Asian culture as well. So there was not one view of that. So Alfred Pillsbury, for instance, you know, he was very much an opportunist, very different than Mr. Huntington. And actually, there are many Huntingtons still around in this country. One of my board members at San Antonio is a Huntington, for instance.
From the same family?
Yes, from the same family. And so everyone in San Antonio.
Of
so
course.
there we have it. But in Minneapolis, so Mr. Pillsbury, you know, the imperial family has gone into dissolution. They're falling apart. There are huge opportunities, and he goes to China, but he also works with dealers who are bringing things out, and they say, "Oh, look, we have the imperial household's silk robes. Would you like to buy them?" And he says, "Of course, I want to buy them." So partly it was the opportunity that he took advantage of. And someone, but like John Vanderlip that we talked about, he wanted Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, St. Paul, to be, you know, reflections of what he thought were the great cities of Europe, so of Rome, of Paris. And so they were buying very broadly what they thought of were masterpieces that would bring things to the citizens of the Twin Cities that would educate them, that would be to the benefit of them. And the museum was founded to be free. So it was always meant to be a place where these great works of art could be seen by everyone, because they wanted to make sure that the community was educated, was enlightened, and was able to see these things. So they weren't so much thinking about the idea of not buying from any place, but they wanted to bring things to this place. And there's no doubt why they chose, Mr. McKim to build this building, which has a great temple on the front. So we actually don't use that as our main entrance anymore. It's become, like so many museums in America, it's very difficult. It has 36 giant marble steps you have to climb up to get into the front door. So we have a later, much more easily accessible entrance around the side, but from the 1970s. So,
And
yeah, it's much easier. And in the snow, believe me.
you don't want to be going up those steps. And Guillaume, perhaps just one last question to you before you have to run. I'm interested in, I think Katie's also raised it, at various points in time during the 20th century, different cultures have been valued differently, particularly in the United States. Perhaps the meaning of Hispanic has changed quite a lot, and how much culture from Spanish-speaking countries, that their status has sort of changed during the 20th century. How would you describe sort of trying to marrying the original mission with sort of society as it is now?
I think words are tricky, and they're not necessarily the best way to describe a mission or something, but that's what we have, they're tools, you know. The way he understood Hispanic was really something to do with Hispanists, so the community of the researchers of the Spanish and Portuguese-speaking world. So, and then it became this adjective Hispanic, and now for the Census Bureau relation, it means something that it didn't mean at the time. But I think the mission stands the same. It's really, you know, giving voice and visibility to the culture and communities that spoke or speak Spanish or Portuguese. And that starts next door in Washington Heights, and that can take you to Spain, Portugal, the Philippines, Africa, everywhere, which is what I like, especially with this collection.
And I'm just a final wild card to you. What among these many different collections would we perhaps find very surprising?
I'm not sure I've seen them all yet, but the jewels, I didn't know about the jewel collection that we have, and it's quite fantastic. But also I think that what's exciting is that the collection that we're going to build, you know, because we've launched this campaign building upon a legacy, so we have this legacy, and we're going to make sure that this legacy grow, this legacy serve, you know, our community and the world at large. So a collection is something that is not frozen. It's something that it's moving forward. And speaking of which, I think I should move forward.
You are now out of time. Guillaume, thank you so much. I think I must mention to everyone that the main building of the Hispanic Society Museum is reopening on April the 5th.
April the 6th to the public. But
April the
if
6th
you
to the
become a
public.
member, you can come on April the 4th and 5th.
So on that note, I'm going to thank you, and I hope
Thank
you
you.
get your train.
And I have two fantastic trustees in first here, so if you have questions, you can
great.
always ask them. So
Fantastic. Thank you so
thank
much.
you so much, and I'm so
And
sorry.
So that is the first act. We will now move to the second. But Per, I think, again, talking about this, I mean, talking about Tessin is particularly interesting because you have this intertwining of a private collector and a royal collection. But can you talk a little bit about a national museum perhaps has two different functions, to be a museum of the country that it's a national museum and to collect accordingly, but also to collect important works of art from wherever they might be. But can you talk about the sort of how they balance?
Well, that is quite an interesting question, I think. A very simple sort of solution or answer to the question is of course, that an international collection was part of the royal collections from the very first moment they were sort of beginning to form. In the 16th century, it was the King Gustav Vasa in the, whatever it was, 1530s or something like that, that started sort of buying paintings. And those were German and Dutch pictures mainly. You didn't really find a proper painter in Stockholm at that time, so you had to import whatever you wanted to have on your walls.
Yeah.
So that's the national collection was actually an international collection from the very first moment. So from that perspective, it's still, we could perhaps still argue that we could acquire international art still, and we really still do that quite extensively, actually. And then it's a way of sort of building these collections. We sort of collect where we already have some strength, but still we're supposed to have a very strong, certainly a strong sort of Swedish collection as well, because nobody else really has that assignment, so to speak, to collect. I mean, there's no other institution which is state owned, which has the sort of assignment to collect Swedish art. So it's we do both, and it works quite okay. Yeah.
And Katie, you don't have the national mission in the same way, but
We have the Swedish mission. Because Minnesota is full of Swedes and Norwegians. No, I'm kidding. But
it's not reflected in the
not in our mission,
not a
right,
major strength of your collection yet.
No.
But you've talked about these, these sort of civic figures who have left these endowments. Can we talk about the kinds of, possibilities and restrictions? Did they come with conditions? Are there things that you have to kind of, that you can't do that you would like to do with these bequests?
So we also, no, we love those bequests. And, I think one of the things that's so magical about working in Minnesota and Minneapolis is that we do have those. And it makes it possible for our museum, as we go forward in time, to think about what are the kinds of collecting imperatives that lie before us. So, we have one of the largest indigenous collections in the United States, and that's because we've also had people who are passionate about that material and passionate about making sure that we both are collecting historical indigenous material and contemporary as well. So our curator is very interested in that. And it's also allowed us, as an encyclopedic institution that has a contemporary element, I mean, we didn't have a contemporary department until 2010, but we've collected contemporary art all along, right? So we've had always, every department has been somehow contemporary, and it's been made possible by the fact that we have wonderful endowments that have allowed us to, for instance, in South Asia, we're buying wonderful contemporary works alongside buying more historical material. So there was a collector who had Chola bronzes so we have those, but then we also are able to buy much more, of a great variety. And I will say the curatorial kind of the hat that they wear in Minneapolis is one of how do we make sure that people understand that these are not frozen in historical moments, that Chinese art is, yes, it's thousands of years old. We have a show about archaic Greek Chinese bronzes on right now, but we've had it interpreted by a contemporary cinematographer named Tim Yip, who you all may know from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. He won the Academy Award for that, for the cinematography. So, it's easy if you go to a museum and you have like 170 Chinese bronzes from the Bronze Age to just walk by them in a coma, because it's like, there's so many of them you can't possibly, but because we have this new interpretation of them that's very contemporary and very, very, very brilliant, and it's been wonderful to see, and that's the possibility that we have an endowment that actually allowed us to pay for that programming that allows us to stay, I think, very forward-thinking and very forward-moving. So I would say that it's a great freedom as opposed to any limitation. Yeah. So yes, we do have to buy Chinese things with those Chinese endowments, but that is not a problem.
That's
an opportunity for us.
And Per, I suppose, I don't know if a Renoir was dropped at the back, at sort of the back gate of the National Museum Sweden, we'd have to be asking quite a lot of questions now. But in many ways, the ideal gift.
Yeah. It is. I mean, from I suppose if you would sort of ask the curators of the world, they would say we'd love to receive things which we can use, however we want, and still, of course, normally a donation, it comes with some sort of wording, so to speak. You're supposed to. I mean, at least you should tell the audience who donated the work that's sort of the least you're expected to do, and that's, I mean, everybody's doing that. So that's sort of a standard way of working, so to speak. We are, however, quite sort of strict when it comes to other kinds of conditions. We don't. I mean, it's quite common that somebody asks us to receive something which comes with the condition that it has to be on permanent display, for example, or on display together with, I mean, if you get a collection, you're supposed to keep it together, which is, I mean, in the US, I suppose that this is more of a sort of normal thing. Than in many European countries, but we don't, and also we very sort of hesitant when it comes to depositions, long-term loans, which, I mean, to me I like to look at this as something that you have to think of for each and every time you are asked about things like that. You should consider the question seriously, and I'm not really in favor of being too sort of, I mean, to have too many principles, really. But
I so agree. I so agree.
Yeah.
We try to avoid those kinds of regulations on any kinds of gifts.
But I suppose one thing, just to make the point that, the collections keep changing. As you said, they are not frozen in time. So that's why I wanted to talk about the present and the future of anyone who might be thinking of giving things to your museum. But objects can also, in your collections, contain histories that perhaps are in the background until there's something that happens to activate them. There are some moments and there are some histories that we perhaps don't think about very often, but were absolutely foundational to your museums. Questions of looting and restitution are obviously very current. I don't think we think very much about Swedish looting anymore, but it is relevant to the National Museum.
We're very sort of quiet when we loot. Secret.
But you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden hasn't been to war for 200 years, or more than that. But in the 17th century, we were quite active in this 30 Years' War and looted quite important works, especially from Prague. So that is a sort of a question which comes up from time to time to discussion. And that's of course part of this international ongoing discussion when it comes to restitution. But we're not really in the. I mean, our problem is small compared to many other international big museums
And I just wondered,
nations, of course. Yeah.
And Kate, I wonder also the circumstances in which collecting has happened, or that when it was different sort of export rules. Is that something that you discuss, or on wall labels, or kind of when you're presenting these objects? How do you approach subjects like that perhaps would not have been a question before, but people would know to think about it now?
So we live on Dakota land, so that's something that's a very big topic for us at MIA. We're the largest community of indigenous people in the United States, in our state, and which is, I think, was somewhat of a surprise to me. I am not from Minnesota natively. I'm a Texan. But so it was interesting to me to learn that. And certainly we talk a lot about that. That's part of our conversation. We're very, very engaged with the kind of community advising and the community guidance that we get from those communities in our city, in our state. We have, Ojibwe, we have Dakota, we have the Sioux, we have many, 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 many tribes, and many, really the heart of the American Indian movement is in the Twin Cities. So we're very aware of that. We also have had restitution issues arise, and we try to deal with them as transparently as possible and to do the right thing. I mean, so we have right now a claim from Italy against our Doryphoros. Some of you all may have read about it in the New York Times. And, we are working through that with transparency and openness with the Italian government. And we've had a few other times when we have had to restitute objects. We have 3 bronzes from Benin. This is something that's very large and important in America right now. The National Gallery and the Smithsonian have just restituted, I think, 400 works of art to Benin. Ours are kind of minor compared to those, but we're talking about that very seriously. We have a collections committee that's very committed to understanding provenance. As when we walk around the fair, we look at pictures, we say, what is a provenance on this picture? And if there is not one, or on this work of art, if there's not one, then we don't touch it now. And I'll always have a board member who will say to me, is this the last time? And I will say, I don't know, because we don't know what else, what will be next. We just simply don't know. But it is complicated, and, I'm sure all of you all do too. I read the paper every day to find out what's happening with the Elgin marbles. Are they going back? Is it secret? Is it not secret? I think that these are the kinds of really important decisions that the British Museum will be making, that we'll be also taking close notes on and watching what happens. But certainly, since I started in the field, I remember in the early 1990s, when there was the first panels about restitution, the world has changed immensely. And we know much more now, and I think that's a very good thing for museums.
And we also don't know what will be activated and what, it's
that's
more,
correct. I think at the time that MIA acquired the Doryphoros, we believed and I say we, I was barely born. The museum believed that it was of clear title, and there was and some people still believe that, and some people don't. So we'll figure that out together.
But I'm very interested in these these layers of history that one museum can contain all at the same time. And I wonder, we've talked a bit about Tessin and his well, sad for him that he bankrupted himself by collecting, highly prized works of French art. Very good for the National Collection of Sweden. But the National Museum has gone through, had a very extensive refurbishment. It reopened in 2018. Yes, I should know because that's when I went. But while the museum was closed, you had some touring exhibitions, and there was a big exhibition of works by Tessa, and I wonder why that was something that you chose to do to kind of foreground.
Well, I suppose the simple question is that it was asked for by the Louvre and the Morgan Library in New York. Of course, it became sort of an important thing for us, also an opportunity actually to not only to tour the exhibition but also to do some new research together with people at those institutions. So it became a very important project, very important exhibition project, even though it wasn't ever shown in Stockholm. Who knows, we might do a similar thing later on. And of course we have we actually did an exhibition on the collection of drawings, Giorgio Vasari's collection of drawings, which was on show we did it together with the Louvre, and it was on show in Paris last summer and in Stockholm this fall. And actually that collection is also sort of part of the Tessin collection. So this is also sort of a collection within a collection. Yeah. Even though it turned out that the Vasari collection was actually the Gaddi collection, which is kind of strange.
So this was a bit of a not a whodunit, but who had it exhibition.
Yeah. It was kind of an interesting, almost like a detective story, the research which was done then came up with this actually discovery that this was not really what we thought it was in the first place. Anyway, that's sort of one of the more, should we say, important things we've done when it comes to sort of looking at our historical collections, which are so important for what we are, so to speak.
Now, if Guillaume was still here, I'd be asking about how temporary exhibitions can feed into looking at your permanent collection and the history of your collecting, because while the Hispanic Society's great renovation has been going on, one of the things that happens when your museum is closed is that your objects can go on tour and live outside your walls and be seen in different ways. But I think we'll just have to leave that thought for another time. I'd like to thank Katie Luber, Per Hedström and Guillaume Kientz, and thank you all for listening to us this afternoon. Thank you.